What's up, y'all? It's Mase Blanco on 610 from G's to Millions. I Don't Need Clout, the podcast. Make sure you check us out on IDon'tNeedCloutPodcast.com and all other podcast streaming platforms. Let's get into it. All right, y'all. Episode 20. Today's more of a part 2 from episode 19, where we break down the Tupac murder, what happened and what's happening now, and we speak on Keefe D being arrested for his involvement in Tupac's murder. All right, so like I said, make sure you catch episode 19. That's part 1 of this. Part 2, episode 20 will make a lot more sense if you watch episode 19. But if you did or didn't watch episode 19, today we're still going to break this down even further, so much further that I actually changed my opinion on who I think the shooter was. So the information we had is correct to an extent, or at least that we know of. We know who was in the car out of the 4 guys. All right, so again, we have T Brown in the driver's seat. We got Keefe D in the passenger seat. We got Big Dre on the rear driver's side. And then we have Orlando Anderson, Baby Lane, who I thought was the shooter at first. I'm going to break this down further for you, but we got Baby Lane on the rear passenger side. And this is just a good example of what we do. I'm not scared to be wrong. I've been wrong. You've been wrong. We're not going to go the rest of our lives without being incorrect about something. And I'm not going to say that I was fully incorrect, but I will say, as always, I make the best judgment with the information I have access to. And we can't be scared to change our ideas. Just because we believe something at a certain point in time doesn't mean we're stuck with that belief. So don't resist new information, and I'll present the new information to you right here. All right, so there's been some new discoveries in the case, and we also have a recorded jail call from Suge Knight giving his reaction. He said Orlando Anderson was not the shooter. He said free Keefe D, and he even went as far to say that they played in Little League together, him and Keefe D. So that goes to show how close this was, how close they were, and just how close their community was growing up.
It was only 2 people in the car. And Pac not going to tell the story. I ain't going to tell the story, but I tell you this. And I never had nothing bad to say about Orlando because, number one, he wasn't the shooter. Number 2, he came to my hearing and told to let me go and tell the truth. They still didn't let me go. I'm not going to get on the stand and testify on somebody for what?
Then who shot Tupac?
It wasn't Anderson, so that's all I got to say about that point. 1,000%. I wouldn't go. I wouldn't testify. None of that. At the end of the day, free Keefe D.
All right, so something that was really interesting to me from this clip from Suge, and just seems like it contradicts the situation based on what we know. And the other thing he says, Orlando Anderson was not the shooter. And that completely contradicts what Keefe D said. That even conflicts with what Orlando Anderson said himself. But the thing that I found really interesting, Suge said Orlando came and testified at his court hearing. So I'm going to take a step back for a second. Suge is on probation. When you're on probation, you can't get into fist fights and any kind of police encounters at all. It's pretty much a probation violation and you'll be charged for it. But in Suge's case, they had the fight before the shooting where Tupac and the Pyrus and Suge got into an altercation with Orlando Anderson. And what Suge said was Orlando Anderson testified at that case for the fight and the gang association. He testified to help Suge in that case. Suge ultimately still lost the case, but the fact that Orlando Anderson would testify in the case for Suge for an incident that happened that night before the shooting and said that Suge had no involvement in that fight. What they had on video footage, he tried to say Suge was trying to break the fight up, which by everyone's account didn't seem to be the real story. And like I said, Suge still got charged for that, so it didn't really help. But the other rumor was that Suge sent him $60,000 to come testify. So was Orlando actually paid to testify for Suge? Did they know each other as well prior to that, like him and Keefe D did? Was he just doing it for the money? Or could he possibly be doing it for a trade-off situation? I'll testify to help you stay out of jail. You don't say anything. You help me stay out of jail. Was it like an even trade kind of situation? Even though blood was shed, neighborhoods and gangs and politics, things like that, they would get in the way of, there's so much politics and shit, man. It's hard to explain. You have to really start digging, but I'll just say that much. There's a lot of politics and shit to where you really can't just go out and retaliate when you're not bigger than the program. That's real interesting for Suge to say that. But even besides that, this is something a little bit more convincing that is on legal documents here. Let's get into it. All right, so in this situation with Keefe D, there was actually a grand jury, and the Clark County transcript of that grand jury said Orlando Anderson was not the shooter. There was another man affiliated with the Southside Compton Crips. His name was Devonta Lee, and he testified that Big Dre was the one that pulled the trigger. There was also another firsthand witness that came forward that said that the arm that leaned out to shoot was a big arm, like a bigger person. And if we look at the two guys in the back seat, we see that only one person was really the bigger person. And I would even argue that Dre was probably the only like real big person in the car. And that really seems like it would make sense. But another weird twist was that Orlando Anderson, it was claimed that he was bragging about killing Tupac, but there's a couple things to consider there too. They did get into a fight before the shooting happened. So if he claims that body, it makes it seem like that was his retaliation from the gang aspect of things, and his street cred would hit a different level. He would have a different level of respect because he retaliated if he would have gotten jumped and didn't do anything about it, and it just wouldn't go well. It doesn't really work like that. And if it does work like that for you, it's not going to be good. I could just say that much. It's not going to be good if somebody does something to you in that world. If you live that life and somebody does something like jump you, beat you up, snatch your chain. This was really over like a chain snatching incident, allegedly. So if people are doing those kind of things to you and you claim to live this life, you're expected to get some kind of get back, some kind of retaliation. So with Keefe D's testimony, kind of speaking on it on interviews that it was Orlando Anderson, Big Lane, that in combination with Big Lane claiming the body for, the street cred, that's kind of why I think we narrowed it down to him. But this new evidence makes it seem like it was impossible for him. The most convincing evidence that I found on this new theory of Dre being the shooter is a recording from a proffer agreement that Keefe D did with the LAPD.
So Orlando shot across Dre?
He leaned over on the window, we rolled down the window, popped.
Who was it?
They would drove on my side, I would have popped them. You know what I'm saying? But they was on the other side.
All right. And for those who don't know what a proffer agreement was, I had no idea what a proffer agreement was. I had to look it up. It's basically like a version of having immunity, not full immunity, but anything that he says in the recording that he admits to while on the proffer agreement, he can't be charged for in the future, with the condition that he's telling the truth. If he's lying about anything, he can be charged. So that's where this gets really interesting. So in the proffer agreement, he tells LAPD he passed the gun to the back. When they were pulling up on the car, he passed the gun to the back seat. He said in his own words that if they were on his side, mind you, Keefe D was in the passenger seat. We're not debating that. If they were on his side, he would have popped him himself. So if we're using Keefe D's own logic here from his own testimony, if he pulls up and Tupac and Suge are on the left side, he's in the passenger seat. He passes the gun to the back seat to make this an easier shot. Why would he pass it to the guy that's behind him that would have pretty much the same angle that he does? And keep in mind, Orlando Anderson is sitting next to the biggest guy in the car. At first, it was claimed Orlando Anderson leaned over Dre and shot out his window. But Dre is a really big guy. If someone was going to lean over another person to shoot, it would have made more sense for Keefe D to shoot over T Brown. So just from his own statements, it contradicts the idea that he would pass the gun to the person behind him. I think there was another motive of saying that Orlando Anderson was the shooter. And it might have just been based on that street cred thing. And that's really a solid theory. Some people might not think so, but like I said, this is the I Don't Need Clout podcast. People need clout, especially in a gang situation where your survival might depend on it. If people think that you might have retaliated and killed Tupac, I could see why it would be beneficial to run with that narrative if you did or didn't. I mean, you were there. No one's going to tell you otherwise. It seems like it would make sense for them to kind of just agree that that was the story. And then, like I said, we have that Southside Compton Crip who testified and said that the arm was of a bigger person. The bigger person on that side that would have had the most clear, clean shot would have been Dre. And if the shooter was Dre, which it seems like that's what the courts are going to try to argue, then Keefe D would be screwed with his proffer agreement where he said it was Orlando Anderson, because then he wouldn't have been 100% truthful, which would violate his agreement, and he could be charged with everything that he said and that he admitted to. All right, so as we compare Suge's story to Keefe D's story to all the other testimonies and the facts and just the physics and who would have had the best shot and what the witnesses said, I'm changing my opinion from Orlando Anderson to Dre. Mind you, both of these people have passed away already. I mean, the only two people alive from this situation are Suge and Keefe D. But I think this is going to end bad for Keefe D. I think he's going to catch some kind of charge. Unless he still has money and has the lawyers and the means to fight this, I think he's going to get some kind of blame for the situation. All right, y'all. Appreciate y'all tapping into episode 20, the part 2 of the Tupac murder mystery being solved. This is Mase Blanco on 610 from G's to Millions. I'll see you next time. I'll see you on the other side.